Hey everyone, welcome to the Doing It at Home podcast. Okay, this is going to be a relatively short intro just because I'm that excited for you to jump into the interview. We interview Dr. Sarah Buckley, and if you don't know who she is, Google her right now, and then you will see how big of a deal this is and why we were so excited about it. Dr. Sarah Buckley wrote the best-selling book, Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering, and this was actually one of the first books I read after becoming pregnant, and it was a huge influence on the rest of our pregnancy and really got the wheels turning on our decision to go with home birth. And she is just a well of knowledge, has so much experience, is herself a mother of 4 home birth children, and I just can't say anymore just because she's that great, and the interview says it itself. So here it is, our interview with Dr. Sarah Buckley. Greetings, Dr. Sarah. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here from the other side of the world, down under in Australia.
Yes, other side of the world. Well, we are so excited. As we were talking earlier in our conversation, we can't wait to get into all these awesome topics with you and hear more from you. I know our listeners are probably really excited. I am just very honored that you would take out time for us. You've been a huge inspiration for me in our process of pregnancy and birth, and it's just it's great. It's kind of like a little dream come true to be able to talk to you honestly. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, totally.
Great. What really struck me about you and your message when I first learned of you in watching the Happy Healthy Child DVD series, which we'll include a link to in this show, but that's where I learned of you. What really struck me was your seamless integration of seemingly 2 differing philosophies around birth, the medical mindset and training that usually comes with things like intervention and assistance, but then also a more natural, holistic approach to the process. But yet you kind of blend them so well in your approach and your messaging. And, in our experience, it hasn't been very common for us to meet people like that, to meet, for instance, a medical doctor who is pro home birth even. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just wondering how that works for you, because on the surface it might seem like, well, shouldn't you not really be for home birth?
Yeah, well, I guess the most influential, I've always been kind of interested in alternatives or seeing behind what's happening, and that's really a useful perspective to take in medicine, because there's a lot happens behind what you see up front, in a whole lot of areas. But in relation to birth, I was always interested in it. My dad was actually an obstetrician, and so I grew up with kind of babies and delivering and forceps and the kitchen drawer and stuff like that. And my grandfather was actually attended women in birth as well on horseback, in those days in the 1920s to 40s. So it was kind of in my blood, I guess. But the most influential thing for me was the births of my own babies. So that's really where I learned to integrate that kind of scientific, biological perspective with my own kind of embodied experience. And I actually had to do some work for that, because, as you say, the usual medical approach and the usual medical beliefs around birth is that it's kind of an accident waiting to happen, and women's bodies are intrinsically flawed and need all this assistance. But that wasn't the experience I had in my own body. So I went out and sought, how did this happen? How was it so different to what I'd seen, to what I'd learned? And so I sought out people like Michelle O'Donnell, who's been a great mentor to me, and Sheila Kitzinger, and there's an increasing number now of people that are integrating that, and actually more and more doctors having home births as well. And to be honest, it's a great choice if you're in a medical or health profession, because when you go into hospital with that kind of background, and this is what I saw in my training, you tend to get either kind of undertreated or kind of ignored because people are a little embarrassed and don't know how to approach you, or otherwise you get overtreated. And both of those things have happened in my own family. So, in lots of ways, it was actually a very logical choice to choose a home birth for myself as a medical professional, and my partner is a medical professional as well.
Wow. I just speaking for the States, in our experience here, there does tend to be a lot of resistance around home birth. It doesn't seem to be the first or maybe even the second choice when you're thinking about your birth experience. Given that, what do you think, how can we create more openness and more acceptance around home birth and what you refer to as normal birth? Given everything that you just said, like through your own experience, how can we create more of that sort of mindset?
Well, I think, what I talk about, the new catchphrase is physiological birth, which is kind of healthy birth according to how our bodies are designed to work. So there is a continuum in that. There's maximum kind of interventions or maximum medical things like pre-labor cesarean, and then there's minimal, maximum physiology, minimum intervention at the other scale. And that's one of the great values of home birth, is if you choose to have a home birth, whether or not you end up having your baby at home, just making that choice puts you down that other end of the continuum. Your chance of having cesarean in particular is usually under 10% compared to over 30%, even higher in some countries. Your chance of having other interventions is much lower. Your chance of having a healthy physiological birth that allows all of your own biology, including your hormones, to flow optimally, which increases, as I say, ease, pleasure, and safety for you when your baby is maximised by home birth. But the problem is we've kind of separated these things out. We've called this, hospital birth, we've called this birth centre, we've called this home. But really, from our body's perspective, it's a continuum. And I think the ideal model is to actually remove or even those labels like home birth, and for women to have a situation where they have, they start off with labour at home and their caregiver comes, and if they want to stay at home, they can. And there are some models of care like that in the Netherlands and New Zealand. There's some options like that here in Australia. I'm not sure if that's the case in America. I think the home birth and hospital practitioners are a little more separate. But really, I think, home birth is maximum physiology, and I think that's the approach to take. How can we max the physiology for low-risk mothers and babies? Because we know that that's safe in a situation with well-trained professionals and, backup for the mothers and babies who need it.
I really like the way that you just described that, because you're accurate in saying that here in the States, at least from what Sarah and I have experienced, there is a separation. You have hospital birth, you have birth center birth, and you have home birth. And those are really the three options that came up most frequently for us. But we have interviewed moms who had situations where, they could choose to labor at home, and if they wanted to transfer somewhere else in the middle of their labor, they had options. And what it makes me think of is a quote from your book that I want to read real quick, because it really is about, the decision making. And the quote is, "A woman's satisfaction with her birth experience is related more to her involvement in decision making than to the outcome." And that really touched Sarah and I, because we talk about this on this podcast. It is a podcast geared around home birth, but we really want to simply empower women and empower families and let them know that they have choice. And so that was a big thing that resonated with us in your messaging.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matthew. That's actually a reference quote, I think, in my book, because that's what the studies say as well, is it's not actually what happens, it's the involvement the woman has, the way she was treated by her caregivers. So it goes back to a bit what I said before, like choosing to have a low technology model of care is a great start, because you're also likely to get caregivers going to support your low technology model of care. And those caregivers we know from research, tend to help women to make more informed choices. They tend to actually follow the medical evidence more than hospital-based caregivers. Again, there's research about that. So, it's really about having the information you need to make the choices that are right for you. And I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all in labour and birth, particularly when I look about the biology of birth, the hormones of labour and birth. That really emphasises how important it is that women labour and birth where they feel safe. And for some women, or for most women, that's kind of a familiar place. That's like a mammalian heritage, that all mammals seek a safe, familiar place to give birth, usually with familiar individuals around them. But for some women, that doesn't, they don't feel safe at home, and they'd rather be in hospital. They feel like that's somewhere they can relax more, because they know that there's something happens. Everything's there at the drop of a hat, which has its pros and cons, of course. But, I don't think we should be telling anyone where they should give birth, but we should be, as you say, giving people choices. And really, as I said, an ideal situation is to give women choices right up to that moment when they give birth, that they can move if they want to or not move if they want to. And, when you're at home and you're in labour, the idea of hopping in a car in the middle of strong contractions is not very appealing. So it probably goes a little that way, I imagine, if women get the choices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm curious if it's this way in Australia. You mentioned women having the information that they need. Like, one of the things that we've experienced is we really had to research. Like, we really had to go and search for information about out-of-hospital birth in order to just be exposed to the different options. Is there more openness to out-of-hospital birth in Australia?
I think it's fairly similar in the end. I think that home birth it's not very common. It's about 0.5% at the moment. A lot of those figures are probably underreported. But what we're developing more in Australia is more midwifery care. So the state pays or subsidises a midwife to take care of you, and she can look after you at home or in hospital. And that's a model where if you have your midwife come to you at home in labour, you can choose to stay at home or you can choose to go to hospital. There is more financial cost, or you could say disincentive, to have your baby at home in Australia. Going to hospital, it's totally free. We have a universal healthcare system where anyone can go to a public hospital and have their baby for no cost at all. Whereas if you have your baby at home, there's an out-of-pocket cost above what that you pay to your midwife as well. So it's kind of ironic because home birth is the cheapest choice, but because it's so low technology, but it's actually the most expensive choice in Australia. So it's not a very kind of enlightened home birth system here, but we are getting better with offering midwifery models of care, which is kind of a way of women having options to give birth at home.
So is that what you see as a way to bring about more awareness, is offering that midwifery care and allowing women to be treated and seen in their homes?
Yeah, I think it's an ideal model of care. And as I said, that's some models in Australia. We have that in New Zealand. That's how the midwives work. And in the Netherlands, that's how the midwives work as well. So I think that is ideal. I mean, obviously, if you're in that situation, you want to research a home birth to decide if you really do want to stay, you want to be confident in your midwives, etc. So, it doesn't mean you don't do the research, but it does mean that you have choices, make the choices that are right for you in that particular situation, because you might have noticed this, but you don't really know how labour is going to go until you get into it, even no matter how many babies you have. Every time's different, and what you're going to want, who you're going to want there. Like, the more flexibility you have in those situations, the better it is, the more you can be responsive to what's happening. Like, you might have a labour where you want lots of people there. You might have a labour where you want to be totally by yourself, and it's a little hard to predict. So the ideal situation is really to be woman-centred, for the woman's the centre of the decision-making, right up to when she gives birth and later. And I just want to mention something else from what you said, Matthew. All that research that you do, that's great preparation for parenting, isn't it? So that's you know that you need to look beyond conventional information to make the choices that are right for you and your family. So well done.
Was it your experience with your 4 home births that you wanted something different in each of those births, and you wanted different people there, or did they kind of follow a similar pattern for you?
Yeah, well, they were quite different experiences of giving birth, but I think generally I could say that I'm not a social birther, and this is generally true. Most women in labour do want to have privacy. I like the way Anna May Gaskin explains it. There's the sphincter law. You've got to have privacy to relax your sphincters. You've got to feel safe in that setting, and for most women in our culture, most Western women, then fewer people is better. But there's certainly our cultures, like, for example, the Aboriginal culture in Australia and some of the Lebanese women, they feel safe when they've got all their family around them. And, so it really is an individual thing. But I think myself, I preferred to be a private birther, although, when I came to give birth, it was beautiful to have my family there kind of at the moment of birth. And, again, sometimes you just don't know, but kind of it's what women are drawn to. And it's pretty typical first time, mum is, finding the smallest room in a house, which is sometimes the bathroom or the toilet, to find the most private space that they can find. And again, we want to give women a situation where they can have that privacy and safety and not be kind of constantly surveyed, not be constantly checked. That is going to elevate their stress hormones, and they're not feeling, this is what I say is the core requirements for birth in all mammals, is to be private, safe, and unobserved. And those things, you can feel private, safe, and unobserved with someone taking care of you. You don't have to go to a cave, but that's really respecting our own mammalian biology, and that enacts itself through the hormonal physiology of labour. If we're not feeling private, safe, and unobserved, our stress hormones go up, and that makes labour slow down or stop. Like if women have had that experience of labouring at home, and then, as we described, having to get in the car to go to hospital, and they arrive in hospital and everything stops because it's an unfamiliar setting. You're not feeling private, safe, and unobserved, and usually you've got to settle in, and hopefully with some support to get to that kind of physiology of being private, safe, and unobserved. Your stress hormone levels go down before labour can start again. So it's really basic to ourselves as mammals, because the way I describe it, it's like, all our mammalian forebears, our foremothers giving birth in the wild, and, it's kind of vulnerable out there. When you're in labour, you can't really mount a fight or flight defence, and you can't, you're very vulnerable. You're making strange smells, strange noises. This baby that comes out that is very attractive to any predators. So, it's absolutely critical, for all mammals, including us, and through our millions of years of mammalian evolution, that we have this private, safe, and unobserved space and feeling in labour. And if we have this sense that we're being watched, that kind of, that alerts us, that sets, that increases our stress hormones. What's going on here? Like, is this really a safe place? It's our kind of primal instinct. It's our monkey, let your monkey do it, they say in labour. It is a kind of a very much an animal experience. I don't know if that was your experience with it, Sarah, but you kind of, this animalistic part takes hold, and you completely in your instincts, because that's what's had us give birth successfully for millions of years of mammalian evolution.
Yes. And I think I was able to experience all of that freely and openly, and without fear, because of the environment that was set up and because of the choices that we made to bring us to our birthing experience. None of that felt inhibited, and so I think that's what really maximized my experience of it.
Yeah, and I can say from a partner's perspective, seeing you like that, Sarah, seeing you as just the raw, like, your animalistic beauty in labor and birthing was amazing. And so for partners out there listening, it's a life-changing experience to see your partner just be in that way.
Yeah, it's a primal force of nature, right?
Yeah, it is. It really is.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, and you talked about the hormones and this, this animalistic biological thing that comes out, and birth really being a huge example and opportunity to witness that. A lot of other things we do in our lives, you may not be able to see that, as we go about our daily lives. And your book, Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering, really inspired me in our journey to planning and creating our birth vision. As I mentioned at the beginning, I first learned of you after watching the incredible DVD series of Happy, Healthy Child, and was just really taken by you and everything you had to say. And your book and hypnobirthing was actually the only thing I did as far as outside resources, because I could have a tendency to really go in and read too many books to the point of creating unnecessary thought processes. But your book, I used to sit in the tub at night and read your book, and that would be, my time. And when I first started reading it at the beginning of being pregnant, we were pretty much set on a hospital birth, working with an OB. And then in time, through the process of reading your book and having some conversations, some soul searching, we eventually came to the home birth decision. And a lot of what your book did for me is created a very logical, very rationally based approach to considering all that was there, all of the elements of it. And I think that was helpful for me because I wasn't at a stage yet to feel emotionally pulled one way or the other, but just seeing the science of it it made so much more sense to go with home birth, with the route that we took. And it allowed me to create a lot of trust within my body after having read all of the science and all of the hormones and everything that you mentioned. So I want to talk more about that. Actually, I want to talk about the hormone cocktail, and I'd love for you to break it down for listeners.
Yeah, so as I say, during labour and birth, Mother Nature gives us this, what I call ecstatic hormonal cocktail. And all of these hormones enhance ease for mother and baby, enhance pleasure for mother and baby, actually stimulate the pleasure and reward centres in the brain, and also enhance safety for mother and baby. And those things are critical. And it's not something we have to go out of our way to do. It's exactly as we were talking about. It naturally unfolds in our body when we're in the right circumstances. And as listeners have probably got, the right circumstances is wherever you feel private, safe and unobserved, and so the conversation we were just having, I want to add that, this hormonal orchestration of labour and birth and of having a baby is almost identical to the hormonal orchestration of making a baby. And, we need the same conditions, right? So that's quite a good lens through which to consider your labour plans. Is this somewhere where I could actually make a baby? And if it is, your chance of, switching on and having a seamless or an easy, I shouldn't use the word easy, but, a fully biological hormonal orchestration is much higher, when you're in those kind of conditions. So that's kind of a prerequisite, you could say, for all of the hormones to unfold optimally. So I talk about 4 hormone systems. There's many, many hormone systems, and, the more you look at it, the more we don't understand a lot about these hormones, how they work, what influences them. There's a lot of research happening at the moment in that area, which I'm honoured to be part of. So oxytocin, probably the most famous one, and it's a great illustration of everything I've talked about because, oxytocin, the whole system is what we call upregulated or kind of activated in the lead up to labour, so that when the spontaneous or physiological onset of labour happens, then the mother's body is optimally sensitive to oxytocin. So the oxytocin she releases from her brain will give her strong, efficient contractions, will maximise the efficiency of her labour, will give her nice, strong contractions afterwards to prevent bleeding as well. So the physiologic onset of labour is really important so that your body's ready and your baby's body's ready. We don't actually know what causes a physiologic onset of labour. I'd get a Nobel Prize if I could tell you that. It's mysterious. If we knew that, right, we could do a lot of things to help women who go into premature labour. We don't actually know, but we do know that it's probably triggered by the baby's readiness. And then it gets coordinated between the baby and the mother through hormones that are produced by the placenta. And part of those hormones is increasing the mother's estrogen, which increases the oxytocin system and the oxytocin receptors, which is how the oxytocin works in her body. And then as labour goes on, she's releasing pulses of oxytocin from her brain, causing these rhythmic contractions of labour, which get stronger and stronger and closer together, more and more able to push the baby out. And then she gets a big surge of oxytocin towards the end that helps her to birth quickly and easily. She's got that big surge as she scoops her baby up, holds her baby in her arms. Her body's completely prepared for that first meeting with her baby. She's calm, connected. She's rewarded. Her reward and pleasure centers are switched on. Her skin is very sensitive, so that as the baby first contacts her skin, skin to skin, the touch of her newborn stimulates the release of more oxytocin, which prepares her to breastfeed, which contracts up her uterus. It calms her down, and similarly, it calms the baby down as well. So all of those things is kind of Mother Nature's superb design, as I call it, for mothers and babies. And the baby has their own hormonal system as well. The baby's releasing oxytocin in labour. It helps with pain relief for both mother and baby, switches on the parasympathetic, the calm and connection system, switches off the stress system as far as possible in labour. Labour is a stressful event for the baby, right? But then, it's designed that the baby comes out in that same situation, calm, connected, ready to begin this, as Michelle Odom calls it, great love affair between mother and baby that is the basis of species survival. We're all here because mothers and babies of all species literally fall in love with each other. They're rewarded by each other's presence, such that the baby seeks the mother and doesn't kind of wander off and get killed by a predator. And the mother seeks the baby such that she doesn't leave the baby alone to be vulnerable to predators. So that's the switching on of the reward and pleasure centers that motivates mammalian mothers to give that dedicated care to their babies, like elephants and mice and cats. They don't go to prenatal classes to learn how to take care of their babies. It all happens through these hormones of labour and birth, switching on these instinctive mothering behaviours, which includes the reward and pleasure centres. So I don't know if you experienced this, and I hope some of your listeners have as well, but that moment after birth is can be totally ecstatic. That's why I call it ecstatic birth. Can be blissful, euphoric, and fulfilling. They say it's like Mother Nature patting you on the back, saying you've done a good job, do more of it. Have more babies, and that's the reward. That's Mother Nature's superb design. So that birth is a pleasant, a fulfilling, a positive experience. And in fact, oxytocin actually kind of softens the memories of the labour pain, so that helps the mother as well to kind of forget.
Right, do it again.
Do it again. That's right. Yeah. So that's just one of the hormone systems. There's beta-endorphins, there's adrenaline, noradrenaline, there's prolactin, all working together in similar ways to optimize ease, pleasure, and safety for mothers and babies. With that, pre-labour preparations as well. It's really important to know that, sometimes I say that, when I do share this in a presentation, I show a picture of William and Kate getting married, the Prince and Princess of England getting married. And I say, imagine if they'd turned up at Westminster Cathedral 2 weeks before the planned date and expected everything to happen. It wouldn't be the same, because all the preparations wouldn't have happened. And it's exactly the same in labour and birth. If we schedule labour and birth by induction, by pre-labour caesarean, there's going to be a gap in the preparations for the mother and for the baby. And some of that explains the kind of problems that particularly caesarean babies can have, because they haven't had that full hormonal preparation, and that optimises the transition to life outside the womb.
Wow. And what are some of the impacts that can show up during labor and then beyond as a result of kind of intervening with that natural process of those hormones?
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of implications for this, and some of which we've studied and a lot of which we haven't. Like, for example, what happens if you're induced? Do you still get the reward and pleasure that I'm talking about? Because those brain reward and pleasure centres are probably not maximally ready after an induction, after a pre-labour caesarean. We know that some interventions do interfere, measurably with the hormones of labour and birth. In particular, I want to mention epidurals, because we talked a lot about oxytocin. And oxytocin is kind of fueled through the processes of labour and birth. I call it the snowball of labour. You might have noticed this labour starts small and gets bigger and becomes virtually unstoppable by the end, right? And the reason it does that is because of these, in biological terms, they're positive feedback loops. So what's happening is the mother's uterus is contracting. That's causing sensations, and the sensations get fed up to her brain through a particular nerve pathway. And the brain receives this message, the uterus is contracting, and the brain responds by releasing oxytocin. And the brain releases oxytocin into the brain. I'll talk about that in a minute, but also back into the body, so that goes to the uterus and causes stronger contractions, and then there's stronger sensations. So it's this positive feedback loop. So the contractions get stronger and stronger and closer together. But that whole positive feedback loop depends on the sensations. So what happens when we knock out those sensations with an epidural? It's so effective at reducing those sensations that the positive feedback loops gets interrupted. So the mother doesn't release so much oxytocin into her body, and then likely she's going to need to have synthetic oxytocin because labour is going to fizzle out. But the other consequence is that in her brain she's not releasing that same oxytocin. And I mentioned as we went through that oxytocin causes calm and connection, causes pain relief, switches on instinctive mothering behaviours, activates the pleasure and reward centres. So all of those things happen because we're releasing oxytocin into the brain, yeah? But when the sensations are not there, that positive feedback loop is disrupted, and the oxytocin in the brain is not released. And that probably has even bigger consequences, because the mother might not get that head of reward and pleasure. She's going to be at a disadvantage in relation to bonding and finding her baby pleasurable. It could interfere with the hormonal release during breastfeeding. In fact, some studies have shown that having an epidural interferes with the hormones that you release later on when you're breastfeeding. Which again are all those same pleasure and reward bonding hormones to bond you to your baby, to reinforce caretaking behaviours, right? So the lack of oxytocin from an epidural is probably very consequential and could have even longer term effects, according to some of the research that's been done. So these are things to consider. I'm not saying any intervention is good or bad, but everything has its benefits and risks. And you want to really know what all those benefits and risks are before you sign up for that. And also, just going back to what we were talking about before, if you really want to avoid things like epidurals and cesareans and inductions, you choose a model of care that is low technology, that prioritizes and supports physiology, and home birth is the one that's the most likely to do that. All the home birth studies around the world show the lowest rates of cesarean, the lowest rates of all of those interventions, with good outcomes for mothers and babies, in good healthcare systems.
Mm. It totally blows my mind how amazing the body is. All those processes that just go off by themselves, and how everything works in this beautiful symphony. It's amazing. And I remember when our midwives started explaining how these different hormones worked and interacted, and some of the positive feedback loops like you just mentioned. And just as a guy, I guess I wasn't paying attention much in high school when they were teaching us this stuff, because it is so beautiful the way that it works.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? Biology, it's
Yeah.
incredible. And the thing is, we don't actually have to do anything. It's a bit like growing your baby. It just happens. Your job is to provide the circumstances to optimize it. So in pregnancy, to provide the nutrition, to provide the kind of relaxed, happy, hormonal situation for your baby, and same thing in labor and birth, to provide that basic requirements of feeling private, safe, and unobserved. And that's kind of what it boils down to. And again, going back to that's why home birth is so ideal for optimizing physiology, because almost by definition, the mother's going to feel more private, safe, and unobserved at home. As I mentioned, it doesn't, not always, not 100%. Some women do feel more safe in hospital, but generally, we feel those ways in familiar settings with familiar people, because that's kind of part of our mammalian heritage as well.
We talked a little bit earlier about some of the resistance to home birth, to natural birth, to trusting this physiological process that the female body is designed to have and go through. Where do you think that lack of confidence for the woman's body to do what it does, where do you think that comes from, and why do you think it's become so pervasive?
Well, I think it's a good question, Sarah. I think it's really multifactorial. I think that we live in a culture that doesn't. Since probably the Age of Enlightenment, we've kind of gone away from the body and into the mind. We've kind of split the body and the mind up, and we've made the body kind of secondary and less important. And that's quite a brutal thing to do to us as women, because we're such embodied creatures. There's so much happening in our bodies all the time, like our menstrual cycle. Our bodies are just miraculous, Every day we're different, every month we're different, and then we can go through these incredible changes, as Matthew was saying, of pregnancy, of labor and birth. So, to decrease our relationship with our body is a difficult thing to do for a woman, and I think that influences us. And it's kind of the downside of feminism to some extent, that we've gone into these very kind of masculine intellectual areas of work where we can be in charge of things and make things happen with our mind. And it doesn't work like that in labor and birth. You can't have a baby by sheer willpower, right? So it's really how do we learn, how do we relearn, to relate to our bodies in a feminine way. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think another aspect of it is that, and I know this from my own training in medicine. You go into medicine to do good for people. A lot of people are motivated to be that knight in shining armor coming and rescuing people. And, if there's nothing to rescue in birth, you feel a bit kind of useless, really. As obstetricians, it's a hard job to sit on your hands, and not do anything. You kind of want to do something and contribute. And, it can be part of our own self-esteem as well. So it's quite a different approach, to a midwifery approach, where the main thing you do is nothing. You're holding that kind of feminine space for things to happen. So I think there's that aspect to it. I think there's politics and money and power all involved in these things, because it really is the most powerful thing in our culture. Giving birth, we can't replicate it. I guess we can by cesarean, but that primal power of any female giving birth and creating new life. I mean, that's what we run on. That's the basis of our survival, individually and collectively. And, I think there's been a, denigration of women's power that's spilled over into the birth room. And I think if women reclaim their power in birth, it empowers our whole lives, right? It empowers us as mothers. It empowers us as women. It really fuels our fire. And that's, maybe something that our culture isn't necessarily wanting as an endpoint of labour and birth. That's the kind of anthropological. Robbie Davis Floyd, birth as a cultural rite of passage. The culture's imprinting their own beliefs and values onto women at the point of birth. And the beliefs and values we're imprinting is that technology is superior to the body, that we know better than you. So, that's quite a motivation towards a technological experience of childbirth if we can imprint those cultural beliefs.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, wow, all of that is, yes, I'm so much wisdom to be gleaned from that, and so many different things to look at, things I hadn't even thought about as far as our journey of home birth and our journey of birth, everything you just mentioned. I mean, listeners, pause that, rewind, listen again, because that was amazing. What do you see then for the future of birth, or what's the space that you hold for it that you would like to see, in our culture?
Well, as I said, there's so many factors that feed into birth because it is such a powerful event, biologically, socially, culturally, on every level. So I think we need lots of action and lots of, on lots of levels. But my particular part of it is really what's the science underpinning it, because I think that's a good approach to take, certainly for care providers, and as in your own experience, it supports families as well to know that there's good scientific underpinning of it. So after I wrote my book, I embarked on a long journey of writing, really delving into the hormones of labour and birth. And I was sponsored by an American group called Childbirth Connection, now part of the National Partnership for Women and Families, and we published a report at the beginning of 2015, and I'll give you the link so you can put it underneath this, but it's called Hormonal Physiology of Childbearing. So everything that I'm saying is referenced in that report. It's quite technical, it's quite long, but it's a really great reference for all of the science behind what I'm saying. So there's that, such I would encourage listeners to go there. And also out of that, I'm now doing a PhD, so I'm privileged to be working with some of the kind of leaders in the world in these areas, with Kirsten Ugnas-Moberg as one of my PhD supervisors, who's the kind of guru of oxytocin and childbearing, so that's really fun. And, that's my next job is really to get some of this information into the peer-reviewed literature, into journals, and really get it under the noses of healthcare professionals. And, obviously lots of other things need to happen. And one of the, important things that need to happen is exactly what you guys have done, which is choosing, these low technology models of care and sharing it. And, every time that we do that, we make it more okay for other people as well. So on the ground, consumers, or as we say, producers, are really critical part of this movement towards, gentle natural birth.
Well, Sarah and I want to say thank you for the work that you do, because, as we were chatting before we hit record, you truly inspired us. When Sarah got a hold of your book, Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering, it really shifted how she thought about herself and her body and those natural processes, and really created the sense of trust in her that allowed her to be confident in choosing home birth. And so the work that you do is incredible on many, many levels. And, you're doing so much to really give people opportunities to, I think, to connect with themselves, and to, choose those experiences which are going to be the most powerful for them and their family. So, Sarah, thank you. Thank you very, very much for the work that you have done and continue to do.
Thank you, Matthew. It's really a great pleasure and privilege to be influential and support, birthing mothers, babies, fathers, and families, and the healthcare providers that look after them.
Right. I mean, when we can influence and empower the way that people enter the world, mean, that's a pathway, that's a gateway to healing the world, I believe. How you enter is a pretty important experience, and not just for you, but the people who facilitate that. And if everyone feels more empowered and informed around that experience, I mean, there's ripple effects to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a beautiful woman who died in 2005 called Janine Pavati Baker. She was very influential to me, and her phrase is "healing birth heals the earth."
Oh, I love that.
Something just popped in my mind. I have an interesting question for you. How do your children feel about their birth stories? Sarah and I have talked about this with Maya, and we were wondering, I wonder how Maya's going to feel being probably one of few friends in her friends group who was born at home. So how do your children feel about their birth story and their birth experience?
Yeah, well, we had a tradition until they got old enough to make up their own mind about it, of telling their birth stories every year on their birthday. So they were kind of embedded in the birth stories, really. That was lovely. And, they know they were born at home. And it's interesting that some of them have chosen friends, found friends that were born at home as well, and been really kind of active around that and talked to their friends about birth, and kind of been a bit shocked by the attitude of other people out there, or the beliefs that other people have. So they've kind of become, well, not really, they're not advocates or zealots, but they've become, sources of information about birth for their friends and family. And I think the other thing, my kids have been lucky that they've been with each other's births as well. So they've had that own experience in their own body. And then, well, the ones that can remember, that's a great imprint as well. So, yeah, I think, you don't know how it's going to come out, and, you've got to really trust your children to do what they're going to do with the experiences they've had. But yeah, they're certainly positive about birth. I'll just share a story that Maya told me. I don't know if you've ever had, how old is your daughter?
6 months.
6 months, all right. Oh, beautiful. Yeah, when they get a bit older, like between 2 and 8, they can often remember, or they might spontaneously say something about their birth. Like my son said when he was 2, he said, "Me born myself water. Me go jump." It was funny, but my daughter Maya, who was the last one, when she was about 8, we had this beautiful day. We went to the beach and we had ice cream. We went to the movies, and she said to me, "Mum, that was the second best day of my life." And I said, "Oh, really, Maya? What was the best day?" She said, "The day I was born."
Oh, wow.
So we can really imprint that pleasure and reward, in relation to birth, rather than the fear that so many people have.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That is.
I think it's great. We both have daughters named Maya.
Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So Dr. Sarah, you mentioned a little bit of what you're working on right now with, your studies and the PhD. Is there anything else that you're currently working on, or ways that people can get in touch with you and see what you're up to? We'll include links to anything and everything that you have going on, but is there anything else you'd like to mention as far as what you're up to?
So I recommend people go to my website, which is sarahbuckley.com. And if you go to the subscribe page, you'll see 2 ebooks. And if you're interested in the kind of things I've been talking about, like the kind of detail of the hormones, I suggest that you sign up to the professional newsletter, and you'll get an ebook called Ecstatic Birth, Nature's Hormonal Blueprint for Labour, which is a fairly concise version of the kind of things I've been talking about. That was first published in Mothering magazine in 2002, and that's an updated version. There's also, on the parents e-list, you get a book called Pain in Labour, Your Hormones Are Your Helpers, which is a much more simple story. So sign up for one or both if you like, but I really recommend those resources. And on my newsletter list, I write regular blogs, I send regular newsletters, keeping up to date. I also have a Facebook page, which is Dr. Sarah Buckley. I post hormone and birth-related things there as well. And we're just talking about before that my children are quite activists. My oldest daughter's 26 now, and my second 23-year-old daughter has done a lot of climate activism with Greenpeace on lots of levels. So if you're interested in any of that, you can also follow me on my Sarah Buckley Facebook page as well. So I post lots of good politics and climate activism on that one.
That's awesome. And we're going to post links to everything that Dr. Sarah just mentioned, and that will be on in the show notes for this episode over at diahpodcast.com.
Dr. Sarah, we're so grateful to you. Really, I mean, this has been an honor. I know that this will impact, inspire, and educate all of our listeners.
Yeah.
This is just the kind of stuff that, they're hungry for. I think there really is this hunger for this, like you said, to heal and to empower and to inform, and things like this, things like what you're doing. You are showing up for your role exactly the way that you need to, and the part that you play is crucial, and it is noticed, and we're very grateful.
Well, thank you. It's totally my pleasure. And, thank you for giving this forum really to support other parents as well. That's a really important part of the whole matrix at the moment.
Yes. So thank you again, Dr. Sarah. We appreciate you and your work and the love that you show to mothers.
Thank you. My pleasure.